This is Team Fire presenting our proposal, Building Fire-Wise Communities. So the National Fire Protection Association has put out a list of 5 tenets that must be supported by all levels of government to end the wildfire problem in the next 30 years. And number 5 is that the public must understand its role and take action in reducing wildfire risk. That's the problem that we chose to tackle. How do we increase fire awareness and fire preparedness on a community scale? And one thing that immediately came to mind was this neighborhood watch model, where a community perceives the threat of crime, and then you see communities responding to the shared concern, uniting to form local boards, getting training from local agencies and law enforcement, really just coming together within a standardized organizing framework to make their communities safer together. So obviously Neighborhood Watch has its issues, but what really interested us was the statistic that 38% of households, given the opportunity, participated in that community education and training and just this organization. And we thought if we could capture that level of participation for fire readiness, we'd be set. So how do we translate that model to fire preparedness? And it takes some setup, because the reason Neighborhood Watch works is because it comes after a neighborhood concern. And in a lot of areas along this urban wildland interface where you really have to worry about wildfire, there is not sufficient wildfire concern. People don't think about wildfire as often as they probably ought to. Walking through the redwoods today, it's difficult to remember that a few months ago the sky was blood red and ash was pouring down from the sky, and the community just a few miles away burned to the ground. So to kind of force the issue, to make it so you have to keep in mind this risk of wildfire, our stage 1 of our proposal is to interface with the county to install signage at wildfire risk boundaries, forcing year-round awareness. This is something you see every day if you live in the area. And a side effect of this that we use later on in the proposal is having a constant reminder of this danger of living in these areas is liable to drive property prices down. So before we can continue pulling on that thread, though, let's look at the sub-stages, which are: how do we identify the risk boundaries, the most at-risk areas and communities where these signs should be placed? Well, we can use an urban analytics tool like Urban Footprint to identify these areas. I'll look at one community. We have 17 pretty good candidates. And we work with individual counties also to design and clear and install these warning signs, following the existing framework that was used to install all these tsunami warning signs you see in a lot of residential coastal areas.
Step is building on this to incentivize community action. Community-initiated fire safety efforts and signage can do a lot towards creating a fire-wise safe neighborhood. With wildfire awareness up, communities are more inclined to unite and participate in existing fire-wise or similar programs. This can include and can extend to more than forming community governing boards, maintenance training, teaching about fire vigilance, and actively making a community wildfire safe. With training complete, communities can request third-party signs indicating fire vigilance, showing residents within and around the community how valuable it is to be a fire-wise safe neighborhood. The goal of this plan is to latch onto existing organizational and technological framework. We want to contribute to an existing solution rather than starting from scratch. There are already many valuable resources out there, like FireWise USA, that exist to help communities become prepared for an evacuation and a wildfire. We want to bridge the gap between these resources and teaching people that they need to be used. So how else can we convince people and communities that it's a valuable idea to make your community fire-wise? We've seen already that the NFPA has tried to educate communities across California and across the United States that it's important for your community to be fire-wise, but we think there's a lot more that can be done. We've identified 2 major issues that we think should be talked about and will help people understand why it's important for your community to be fire-wise safe. Uninformed populations are present within every community and face a serious risk with disasters like a wildfire. They may not receive critical evacuation information until it's far too late. Uninformed populations can include seniors, who may not be on the technological or social information tracks that we are, and could also include those without reliable access to cellular service who may not receive emergency texts when they need to. This is something that can be very difficult for an overarching program like FireWise to address, but is very easy for a local community group to understand. People in the community know about the community and know who might be under threat for being uninformed. Risk underestimation is another big problem that we think is overlooked. People say to hope for the best, but plan for the worst, but a lot of the time you don't even know what the worst could possibly be. Compounding problems like the 2020 pandemic can make a fire solution much more difficult and requires a much stronger community response. A lot of the time, this is only possible if you have a community that has been trained and knows what to do in the event of a wildfire. In review, our plan is a low-cost, minimally disruptive method of increasing wildfire awareness and fostering community-level readiness. First, we want to use urban analytics to identify high wildfire risk communities. In these communities, we want to work with county governments to install fire warning signs so people are aware of the risk of fire exposures. This will increase wildfire awareness, could potentially leave people afraid of the threat of a wildfire and decrease the property value of wilderness-urban interfaces, but our plan addresses that. We want to then work with Firewise or a similar organization to promote existing community preparedness resources so that people feel they're protected from a wildfire. Communities participated in training and organization can become fire ready. And before and after a wildfire, they'll know what to do. We want to then work with Firewise to install Firewise community, signed and certified communities, to inspire residents in other communities to build similar interfaces so that they can be safe in the event of a wildfire. And the outcome is that fire readiness is increased, the property values will be restored, people will understand the threat of a wildfire, but at the same time will know what to do and will be confident in their ability to handle an emergency.